everybody. Welcome to the County Seat. Today, I'm your host, Chad Booth. Last week, the Deseret News had a paper-sponsored op-ed in their paper about carbon and carbon, referring, of course, to the county and its baseline economic driver, coal. In the course of that conversation, or that op-ed, they ended up talking about the fact that we need to wake up to the reality that coal is going to be changing, and they were just basically saying that energy officials in the state should be looking at retraining people, and we didn't think that that was a fair conversation. So we've invited to the county seat for this half hour Dr. Laura Nelson, who's Governor Herbert's energy advisor and the executive director of the Governor's Office of Energy and Energy Development. Thank you for taking the time to join us here.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Glad to be here.
Well, it's always good to have a chat with you.
Thank you.
So last time you and I talked, it was just at the beginning of the Trump administration. There had been no appointments made. In fact, the moratorium on coal had not even been lifted.
Sure.
So we're a year later down the track. What's changed?
Well, you know, definitely from the federal policy level, we're seeing a more favorable outlook on coal. So it's not just been the coal moratorium, but also we've seen positive movement when it comes to resource management plans through the BLM, or removal of BLM's master leasing program that they had initiated, and other things that really were impediments, I think, to advancing coal leasing in particular. We've also seen a relook at EPA's regional haze initiative. Specifically, I don't know if you recall that EPA rejected the state's implementation plan for regional haze, and that really pertains to two of our very large power generation systems, Hunter and Huntington. And under the federal plan, which they then wanted to invoke, we were looking at $700 million plus of new investment for those plants. And the state then basically challenged that, as did Rocky Mountain Power, our large investor-owned utility here in the state, and said, hey, wait a minute, the state came up with a cost-effective plan that achieved what the federal regulations required under regional haze. And so what we have now with the new administration is a relook at the state's implementation plan as a cost-effective solution. So generally, I would say from the federal level, it's good news, right? Okay. But what we have to look at, I think, when it comes to coal, it's really about demand in supply, okay? And it's also about cost and revenues. And so let's maybe talk a little bit about demand and supply, just in the energy space generally. What we see right now is kind of a leveling out domestic energy demand, right? Okay, partly driven by the fact that we have, changing weather considerations, but overall demand's lower. We've become more energy efficient. And in terms of supply, we have new renewables coming on. At the same time, when we look at what's happening in terms of cost, we have fuel prices for natural gas declining, right? So that means cheaper electricity from natural gas, maybe compared to coal. And then on the revenue side for coal, they're really seeing some challenges in terms of what they're able to get for energy sales for the reasons that we've mentioned. So fuel cost being a driving factor, more renewables being a driving factor, and policy, which certainly impacts cost, has moved in a favorable direction. And I think it remains to be seen whether or not it moves us favorably enough in light of these other factors.
That does kind of address an issue of the commodity prices. Natural gas is tended to be a little bit more volatile in its prices than coal. And we're seeing this supply thing handled. Could that volatility come back to natural gas that might further make coal look a little bit more attractive?
Well, that's one of the things we always talk about when it comes to natural gas is really, the volatility in pricing. Long-term contracts for natural gas are still pretty limited because it's a hard commodity to predict in terms of pricing. And you and I have talked before about the fact that it's always, I think, a risk to put all of our eggs in one basket when it comes to a resource. Today, natural gas makes up about 34% of our energy portfolio domestically, or electric generation portfolio. Coal's about 30% still domestically. Renewables, about 13%, maybe a little less than that, and nuclear about 20%. So we are seeing a changing mix of favorable natural gas profile, but I think we certainly need to be mindful of keeping a balanced portfolio nationally.
Well, we've consumed our first 5 minutes, and we're going to take a quick break here on the county seat. We'll come back and continue our conversation with Dr. Nelson. It's always fascinating to talk to you.
Thanks.
We'll be right back on the county seat.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
Have you ever wanted to recreate the world around you? Add some excitement, culture, adventure? Well, there's no need to remake the world when that perfect combination already exists. Just remember 4 words. Welcome to Weber County. In Ogden, you'll find everything you're looking for, from the top of Powder Mountain to the restaurants of our revitalized downtown. Ogden, Utah, mountain to metro and everything in between. Visit Ogden.com.
The Utah Farm Bureau began as a collection of farmers supporting each other to raise the food we enjoy. Today, Farm Bureau membership encompasses everyone, whether ranchers, growers, or just everyday folks like you and me. Members enjoy discounts on items like vehicles and ATVs, or insurance that's very affordable. You don't have to be a farmer to join, and dues are small, but together we make a big difference in keeping our food supply local and abundant. Join Utah Farm Bureau.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking with Dr. Laura Nelson today. We've kind of covered the federal and the regulatory environment. I did want to ask one other quick question on that. You know, we've got this reprieve from this pressure on coal at an administrative level, but that could change in 8 years, could it not? Sure. And would that, I mean, does that affect the decision by some to say, well, let's look at our future power generation by coal because of that uncertainty? I think that's a great way to frame this question, because you know what I was talking about earlier is that when we look at a generation resource, you have to compare the revenues to the cost. And the policy piece is just one part of the cost, right? You've got maintenance cost and you've got the fuel cost, and right now we've said natural gas is cheap relative to coal. And the emissions profile associated with natural gas is pretty favorable too compared to coal. Doesn't mean the coal is bad, just different. What we really need to be doing, I think, right now is an opportunity to take that message about coal and the environment being incompatible and continue on this path of talking about how coal, as part of an all-of-the-above energy mix, can actually drive environmental enhancements. In fact, there were some reports that came out recently that were prepared by the National Energy Technology Lab in 2015 that had not previously been released. And one of the things that it talked about was the importance of innovation in the coal space, driving, you know, continuing to drive, I should say, the efficiencies in coal and the environmental improvements in coal, because we were going to need that as part of an overall robust energy mix. Back to our don't put your eggs in one basket. Exactly. So do you feel from your perspective that there is, in that spectrum, some improvement that can still be made as far as coal and its environmental impact?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, Utah, and I know I've shared this with you before, has very efficient power plants. I mean, in the top 3 in the country. I think ways that we can continue to learn to better use coal generation are already taking place. One has to do with ramping, how we can move coal-fired generation up and down to move with load or as new resources like renewable resources come on. So that's one thing that we can do and one thing that we're seeing occur. So they act more like a natural gas plant, makes them more competitive perhaps over the long term with natural gas. Also, I don't think that we've given our best effort nationally to carbon capture and ultimately sequestration technologies. We've just spent probably close to a decade not investing really in coal innovation as a nation. And so I think that there is bandwidth that we really haven't realized yet. And so I think it's time to kind of focus on that compatibility between coal and the environment.
When the word carbon comes up, I see, you know, one image that comes to my mind is coal burning and spewing the old black smoke from the movies from the 30s and saying, okay, well, there's one application for carbon. On the other side, I see carbon fiber, and I see all these technologies that are coming out. That carbon capture, does it have an afterlife?
So, you know, maybe I'm going to address kind of this in a couple of different parts. One is we have seen a lot of coal retirements in the last few years, with most of them occurring in 2015, 2016. But we have to remember that our coal fleet is pretty much the oldest fleet in the country, right? So these were those older, smaller, less efficient, maybe not as environmentally sound facilities. And most of those were retired in 2015, 2016.
Like the Price plant.
Sure.
In the canyon
exactly
at Castleberry.
right.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are still some retirements on the books through about 2020. It remains to be seen whether all of those retirements occur or not. But remember, we're already dealing with an older fleet. And it's natural, I think, for innovation to come in and replace that older fleet. So that's okay. So the black smoke is definitely a thing of the past. And I absolutely want to highlight that. What you see coming out of coal plants today really is steam. Okay, so I think it's important to do that. Back to the innovation piece. If we look at carbon capture and sequestration, carbon capture, there's already a use for that captured CO2 in commercial operations. So there's already a market, and we can continue to look at infrastructure and build out for enhanced oil recovery or for other uses in manufacturing for that CO2 that's in fact captured. And if we're looking at longer term where we've got to sequester the carbon, then that's something I think we have to continue to evaluate. What does that look like over time, and what are the best places for that long-term sequestration to occur? And so I hope I addressed like the 3 general parts of your question, but you let me know if I missed anything.
I think we've done well. We've also consumed another 5 minutes. We're going to take a break. I love these conversations with Dr. Nelson because the half hour just evaporates. We'll be back with our conversation in just a minute.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
The Layton Hills Mall offers more than just shopping. Bring the whole family and enjoy Sequest Interactive Aquarium to feed the fish and exotic birds, hold live reptiles, and even swim with the stingrays. Or pump up the action and visit Dartside, Utah's premier soft foam dart tag arena. And don't forget the Great Room Escape, where you can challenge your friends to solving mysteries inside themed rooms. So come and experience great fun at the Layton Hills Mall and visit playindavis.com for other great activities.
all local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
Welcome back to the County Seat. We're talking with Dr. Laura Nelson from the Governor's Office of Energy Development. We kind of left on the note of innovation and uses for coal, and part of that obviously is rare earth minerals that are in high demand, particularly for some of the other sources of electricity generation that also can come from coal. You brought a show and tell today.
I did. I brought a show and tell. I want to give you this gift, Advancing Utah Coal. This is a report that the Office of Energy Development prepared and released last year. And I have to say, we didn't do it in isolation. We always do it with our partners. We also worked with Carbon County to establish the Advanced Coal Research Group, and they were involved in development of this report. One of the key things that Utah is doing to drive continued utilization of coal, which, as I mentioned, is part of the overall all of the above energy mix that's important for energy and the environment, is looking at how we can continue to be innovative. We've got carbon capture and sequestration technologies that have been developed right here in Utah that are continuing to progress and looking at pilot scenarios. We've got opportunities for coal to liquids technologies. And we've also got a couple that you may not think of if you are only focused on the energy side of coal. One is converting coal into carbon, so carbon fiber, and one is extracting rare earth minerals from coal. So coal to carbon is important as we look at our overall energy mix because carbon creates lighter materials, right? So a car built out of carbon is going to be a lot lighter than a car built out of steel, and it's going to be more energy efficient. So a win-win, right?
That's true. It is a win-win.
And then wind and solar definitely use a lot of rare earth minerals. And those rare earth metals are typically found in Asia, most of them in China. And you know, the extraction process around the mining of these rare earth minerals is not, you know, environmentally neutral. There are definitely some impacts. And so just like with anything, we need to look at how we can diversify our access to those rare earth minerals. So in Utah, we're looking at how maybe coal can serve as a source for rare earth minerals, which would, one, help to diversify impacts, and two, help to increase the security for U.S. access to those materials.
I do want to talk about the reliability of coal factor. I had this thought come to my head of trying how many power supply sources could easily be disrupted in creating electricity for the grid. And to me, coal plants are the only place where I've seen fuel on the ground ready to go in the hopper. Can you address that for us for a minute?
Well, you know, I think that the concern over fuel disruptions or fuel volatility is not misplaced. We do need to look at, you know, how are we going to ensure reliability and resiliency over time, especially as we see more of these intermittent resources come on. And so let me maybe talk about reliability in the context of how we move electrons around. We need transmission lines to do that, right? And we have found that it takes a long, long time to build transmission. So as we continue to see those transmission projects delayed, there is a chance that we're going to see more congestion on what I'll call the pipelines, okay? Because if you're relying more on the natural gas to back up those intermittent resources locally, you could start to see some real congestion in pipelines. That's just my opinion. So I think real time, that's an issue that we're going to have to address. I think your bigger question is really around emergency scenarios. How do we plan when it comes to reliability, resiliency in the face of an emergency? And that, I think, just goes back to the need for the all of the above resource mix. And I think Utah has really demonstrated that that mix can be effective in providing resiliency and also reducing greenhouse gases. In fact, we've reduced our greenhouse gases by 14% since 2008, and we have done it with coal as part of the mix, and we've also done it without mandates.
Wow, that's impressive. That kind of leads me to another thing. While we've got this reprieve, we have an opportunity to promote some of these voluntary things that usually tend to get better outcomes than required things that cause us to cut back. How does that fit into this mix?
Well, you know, we think market-based incentives really work, and I think that that's demonstrated by the Utah approach. We are continuing to see significant economic growth, and so that greenhouse gas reduction number in terms of our electric generation mix, we've realized even as our economy has continued to grow. Now, growth may slow a little bit, but we're still a growing economy, and so we are going to want to achieve our environmental goals, our energy goals, while keeping energy affordable. And that's one thing that we've done here in Utah. And you compare Utah to, let's say, California, where they've had very aggressive greenhouse gas goals. And I think you put our accomplishments next to theirs, and we've been very successful. I think their reductions would be in the neighborhood of about 20%, and there are debatable numbers since 2000. We're 14% since 2008. Both very robust economies, growing economies, but their electricity rates are double, give maybe just a little bit compared to Utah rates. So Utah is doing it at the same time that we're keeping energy affordable.
So you're basically saying if I have a $70 electric bill at my house, and my house were in California, it would be $140 a month?
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
Depending on the time of year, it might be more.
Wow. Well, we're going to take a quick break right here. We'll come back. We're going to add a little bit to our last, because I've got a couple of questions that I want to save, and I know that it's going to take a little time to answer them. So we're going to break early here on the County Seat. We'll be back in just a minute.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
ATV? Check. Four-wheel driving? Check. Bouldering? Check. Mountain biking? Check. Hiking? Check. River rafting? Check. Adventure is about more than just crossing activities off of a list, but hey, if you can find a place that gives you everything you're looking for, all the better. In Emery County, you'll find the San Rafael swell, trails, lakes, and the small-town hospitality you're looking for. San Rafael Country, in the heart of Utah. Visit us and check something off your list.
Look south to adventure. Look south to beauty. Look south to San Juan County. Out here, the road goes on forever, and what you'll find will change how you see the world. Climb on your OHV and discover forgotten landscapes and vistas that challenge the imagination. From Blanding and Monticello to the cliff faces of Monument Valley, we're open and ready for you to explore. San Juan County, Utah's Canyon Country.
Welcome back to the County Seat. We've been talking about coal and its future in Utah. You know, you look at, we've got 4 counties that really heavily rely on coal. It's been a part of their traditional economy, and these were the ones that the Deseret News said, wake up guys and figure out something else to do, being Carbon and Emery and Sevier County, and those are our coal economies in the state. Is there any chance that if we can clean up coal technology and we can find some way of proving its value in the next decade while we have a favorable administration, that there could be new coal power plants that come online?
You know, that's a tough question. It takes a long time to plan and permit a coal plant, and you need the investors there to do it. And I would say one of the biggest challenges right now is we don't see dollars attracted to investing in new coal plants. I think one goal that we can achieve is retention of our current existing efficient coal fleet, and that's going to be important for resiliency within our electric grid system. There are ancillary services, I'll call them, that are provided by coal plants. They're also provided by hydro facilities that are difficult to realize as these plants go away. And if we don't retain them, we are going to see higher prices, period. In fact, the reports I mentioned by the National Energy Technology Lab already indicated that. So that's one. I think absolutely focus on retention of our very efficient, cost-effective plants today. As far as economies go, where coal has been a mainstay of development and growth, I think that we need to continue to look for opportunities for those coal resources, including exports. You and I have discussed, in fact, that exports are up global from the U.S. 60% in Q1 of 2017 compared to the same period in 2016. So global demand for coal is still there. So let's also work on figuring out these export opportunities. And we've seen resistance at some of our ports, but I think there are certainly some opportunities there. And we've met recently even with folks from Sichuan province in China. They came here, they toured, met with industry to talk about advanced coal. So those opportunities are real, and those are the things I think we can sort through.
So is there a possibility that we can export our technology alongside of our coal?
Absolutely.
And perhaps improve the overall picture of coal, because I know that other places aren't generating it the way we do.
Yes, absolutely. It's a combination of great technology and really good coal that's going to lead to the win-win-win for our energy, our economy, and the global environment.
Okay, very good. One question. Do you think people are generally misinformed about coal in Utah? The general public, the people that are watching the show?
I think it's a mixed bag. Some people have a good understanding of the value of coal, and some people, I think, don't have a full set of facts.
How do they fix that?
Continue the conversation. I think we've got to keep talking about it.
Does this have some of that conversation in it?
I think so, and I think folks can go online. They can take a look at it, energy.utah.gov/publications.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You certainly, I find your conversations very enlightening. Coal is still part of the picture, and we just want to give a shout out as far as Carbon County goes. We still think that you've got a good future in coal, and obviously the state seems to be taking seriously trying to help you accomplish that. So thank you for watching The County Seat. Thank you for joining. Catch us on social media, and we'll see you next week on The County Seat.